Welcome to the Eastern Counties Tractor and Heritage Spectacular. We're now in the display of 1930s and before tractors assembled by Roger Desborough, and we're looking first at a Caterpillar 60, an early crawler tractor fitted with an Atlas marine diesel engine as a conversion. Originally this tractor would have had a petrol engine, and it was worked in California, the land of cheap fuel, but its prodigious thirst persuaded Henry Kaiser, who was the owner of it, to fit the diesel engine, and a very successful conversion it was. This is one of the only tractors in the world to have been fitted with this engine, and is a very rare exhibit. Lovely to see it here. A heavy tractor capable of an amazing work output in its day. Now to a slightly earlier machine. This is a 1913 Case 2040 Prairie Tractor. This is a two-cylinder opposed paraffin fueled engine. You see the vertical radiator, which is cooled by an induced draft caused by the passage of the exhaust through the Venturi funnel at the top. It draws air in at the bottom, and as the engine pulls harder, the exhaust puffs harder and draws in more air, so it's like a self-regulating thermostatic cooling system. This tractor will have been used in Canada to break the virgin prairies. Very powerful tractor, capable of working long hours on cheap kerosene fuel. Of course, J.I. Case, a very famous tractor manufacturer, and the name is still evident today as part of the Case New Holland organisation. Now to another Prairie tractor from the Avery Company this time. The Avery Company of Peoria, Illinois, very famous manufacturer of tractors in its day. This is rather smaller than the Case, but again a powerful tractor used for breaking the virgin prairie lands in America and Canada. Unusual in design in that the engine slides backwards and forwards on the framework of the tractor in order to change the gearing of the machine. Vertical radiator again with induced draft cooling, and the engine running on kerosene, which was the standard fuel for these prairie tractors, and indeed for most farm tractors until after the Second World War. Now for something rather different. This is a Ford Model A tractor conversion. It's one carried out by the Patterson Company, which specialised in turning Ford cars into tractors. The Model A had quite a powerful engine, similar in concept to the engine which became so familiar in the Fortson Tractor. And of course, the farmer could take his old car, fit the Patterson conversion, and give it another lease of life as a tractor. Very nice exhibit and quite unusual. Another conversion now, this time from the rather smaller and earlier Model T Ford. Same idea, the car converted to become a tractor. Quite capable of doing light jobs around the farm, chain harrowing, rolling, cutting grass, and indeed almost anything that was needed on a small farm. Another lease of life for the car as a tractor. Showing the versatility of the Ford mark. We see one here which is converted to operate as a road roller. In its day, this would have saved endless hours of backbreaking work for a man pushing a roller, or indeed for a horse drawing a roller. This could do the job. Just put fuel in the tank, driver on seat, and away you roll. Some German engineering this time. This is a Lanz Bulldog industrial model from 1925. It's an HL12 single cylinder hot bulb semi-diesel engine. The hot bulb engine is quite unusual in that it operates on a low compression ratio, but there's a bulb built into the head which is preheated by a blow lamp for starting, and which maintains its heat in work. The heat of the bulb ignites the fuel which is injected at top dead center, and the engine is capable of running on almost any fuel you can pour into the tank, from creosote through olive oil, waste engine oil, kerosene, diesel, you name it, the Lanz will run on it. These tractors were almost indestructible and now are very, very collectible. The Lands Company was eventually taken over by the John Deere organisation, and sadly the name Lands disappeared into the pages of the history books. Another tractor from the Avery organisation now, a very nicely restored 816 smaller version. This tractor again features the vertical copper tube radiator, the cooling system, a twin cylinder horizontally opposed engine running on kerosene, steel wheels of course, and the starting handle is here. This is how you start the engine. That's the theory anyway. Sometimes it starts more easily than others. This is how Henry Ford brought mechanisation to the farms. Henry Ford himself was a farm boy. He grew up on a farm and he vowed to do away with the drudgery which he always hated as a boy. When he produced the Fortson, which, as we see, Fortson stands for Henry Ford and Son, he produced it with a 4-cylinder side valve engine. This is an early one with a ladder type radiator. We can see here this. It's called the ladder type radiator. Steel wheels, of course, three forward and 1 reverse gears, trembler coil ignition, water washed air cleaner. Nice old tractor, again running on kerosene. This tractor was sold in the tens of thousands and was cheap and brought mechanisation to the farm. Most farmers started with a Fortson. It was unsophisticated, it was simple, but it did a lot towards the demise of the working horse. Another Model F here, slightly earlier one from 1918, the previous one was 1919. Same concept, steel wheels, side valve engine, 3-speed, 1 reverse gearbox. Henry Ford's simple way to mechanise the farm work. Now to a product from the famous International Harvester Company. This is the Mogul 1020 single-cylinder tractor, horizontal engine, massive flywheel to balance the reciprocating forces inherent in a single-cylinder engine. The steel wheels, narrower track at the front and at the back. The Mogul was a very popular tractor in its day. It was operated and run and sold at the same time as the famous Titan tractor, which featured a 2-cylinder engine and did really become a more popular tractor than the Mogul. These tractors are very collectible, and this is a perfectly beautiful example of the latest incarnation of the Mogul in 1020 form. Another Mogul tractor here, this time a slightly earlier version, the 816. The previous tractor was rated at 1020. That means 10 horsepower on the drawbar, 20 on the flywheel. This is 8 horsepower on the drawbar, 16 on the flywheel. Basically the same concept, but earlier, less developed, and slightly smaller dimensions. Very, very nice tractor indeed. Again, the single cylinder, heavy flywheel, narrower track at the front than at the rear. International Harvester, of course, one of our great manufacturing companies from America, featured in the tractor industry from its very earliest days right through to the latest incarnation as part of the Case IH New Holland organisation. Now we talk about the Case organisation. Here is one of its products, a Case 1527, known as the cross motor. In the 50s, Alex Isigonis invented the BMC Mini with a cross motor, and it was hailed as a revolutionary concept in car design. There's nothing new under the sun. JI Case were producing a motor mounted transversely in the tractor in the late 19-teens up to the late 1920s. This is a model 1527 cross motor, steel wheel tractor. This particular example has been used obviously as a thrashing tractor, driving a thrashing drum by means of a belt from the pulley here. You can see there's a belt guide been fitted as an optional extra, and it has a whistle mounted on the exhaust system, very unusual feature, designed to signal that it was time for tea break and time to commence work again after lunch, after a break. These tractors, very, very strong, with the case eagle motif. That's old Abe, the eagle, mounted on the globe, showing the international nature of case, and of course the American eagle.
Okay.
Another transverse engine tractor now. This is a Minneapolis cross motor version. You can see the engine mounted transversely, the belt pulley at the side. A transverse engine mount had its advantages in that a bevel gear was not necessary to change the direction of rotation from front to back to side in order to drive the wheels. So straight gears were used all the way through, as they were on the case that we looked at previously. The Minneapolis company was eventually absorbed into Minneapolis Moline, which concentrated on the designs from the Twin City company rather than on the Minneapolis more antiquated design, and these tractors faded away into the pages of the history books. But now, very collectible tractor. This is one of the last that were made, with its highest horsepower rating, 2744. Whether the colour is correct, I'm not sure. Maybe, maybe not. Perhaps a few were produced in red at the very end, but most of them are green and grey. This is an example of the Twin City from the Minneapolis Steel and Machinery Company, which formed part of Minneapolis Moline as the companies came together and merged to form that great company. The Twin City 1728 tractor was designed in 1918 as the 1220. It has a very modern engine which has 16 valves and a 4-cylinder engine, twin camshafts, side-mounted camshafts. It has full pressure lubrication and a lot of modern features which were well before its day. Twin City was a very successful company and produced very long-lived tractors. Again, quite modern features: impulse magneto, high tension, full pressure lubrication in the engine, multi-speed gears, over-center clutch. But again, the steel wheels, this particular one has had rubber treads fitted to make it more acceptable in modern vintage shows, less damage to the concrete floor. Now, as they say, to something completely different. This is a British Wallis from 1921. Wallis, famous company which pioneered the boilerplate construction system. The sump of the engine is integral to the body of the tractor and is manufactured from boilerplate, rolled into shape and forming part of the framework all the way through to the back. Wallis was later absorbed by Massey Harris and formed the basis of the design of the earlier Massey Harris tractors. This is a beautiful example, almost perfectly restored, and a very rare machine. Okay. Again, we're sticking with the British theme here. We have the Austin Tractor, produced by the famous Austin Car Company and fitted with an agricultural version of the Austin 20 horsepower engine, painted in the blue livery, side valve engine. Quite unusual in that these engines had a non-impulsing magneto, so they have to be wound quite rapidly to start. The Austin Tractor had limited success in the UK, and manufacture was shifted to France later in the life of the tractor. Rather more Austin Tractors were made and sold in France than was the case with the British version, which makes the British example all the more collectible nowadays. Now to some very rare tractors. We have a marvellous display here today of tractors from the Peter Brotherhood organisation of Peterborough, which produced the Peterborough Tractor in very small quantities. They originally were fitted with a sleeve valve TVO engine, wasn't too reliable in service, and not so many of these tractors were sold. This is an early one in unrestored condition. Very nice to see them like that. Now to a restored version, still fitted with its original sleeve valve engine. These engines when they're in good condition, run very quietly. There's no clatter from the valve gear in the way that there is with overhead and side valve engines. Another version here, this time fitted with a Gardner 4LK engine. It's been dieselized. The old engine was worn out and the owner fitted the Gardner diesel engine to give the tractor another lease of life. I've driven this particular tractor and it really is, the engine suits it very, very well. It's very powerful, very torquey and very desirable. Another completely original one here, and if we look at the side we can see that the original transfer is still evident. The Peterborough Tractor from Peter Brotherhood of Peterborough. You can see there the original engine in original condition. Absolutely wonderful exhibit. Sticking with a British theme, we have something completely different here. The Saunderson Tractor, produced by Saunderson and Mills. Very nicely restored example. 2-cylinder, vertical engine. You can see the separate cylinders are cast individually. A riveted fuel tank. Saunderson were big on riveting. Mudguards fitted over the steel wheels. The engine again mounted transversely, as was frequently the case with these early tractors. Remember the advantage that we talked about of the gearing being kept in the same plane all the way through to the revolution of the driving wheels. So there were no torsional forces coming to bear on the body and the chassis of the tractor and attempting to twist the frame, as it were. Saunderson tractors, produced in reasonable quantities and were popular in their day, not so common nowadays, very collectible. And as we mentioned earlier, this is a very nicely restored example from a well-known local collector. Another example of the Wallis Tractor, this one an American Wallis in the earlier blue livery, 4-cylinder overhead valve engine fitted with vaporizing manifold to burn kerosene, the popular cheap fuel of the day. Again, steel wheels, which were the norm. The belt pulley mounted here. This was used to drive implements such as thrashing machines, cake mills, etc., etc. This one's fitted with what are called road bands. You can see the spade lugs here, which were used to engage the soil and provide traction for the tractor. Pretty destructive when the tractor was run on a hard surface. So these road bands were fitted to isolate the spiky ends of the spade lugs from the road and give a smooth ride between work. This tractor has been fully restored and is in absolutely as new condition. What a very, very nice example of the Wallis Tractor. This is a very rare tractor, a Sawyer Massey Company Limited, Hamilton, Canada, the forerunner of Massey Harris, Sawyer Massey. This time, longitudinally mounted engine, 4-cylinder vertical engine running on kerosene, started on petrol, this tank, and then when the engine's warm, switched over to kerosene, which is the main fuel contained in this tank. Water cooled with a front mounted radiator, conventional radiator system. Quite a modern design really in its day. Although it looks, nowadays it looks old fashioned. It had many features which were ahead of its time. Steel wheels with angle cleats provided the traction in the ground, and this tractor would be capable of very prolonged heavy work. One of a very, very small number of these tractors in existence today, and one of only 2 or 3 in the UK at the moment. Now to an icon of the tractor world. This is the famous, internationally famous Roomley oil pull from the Meinrad Roomley Company, the famous oil pull tractor. This tractor was called an oil pull because it uses oil in every one of the areas of its operation. The engine is lubricated by oil. It runs on oil as a fuel, kerosene, heavy kerosene, perfectly suitable for this tractor. And the cooling system is filled with oil. Oil has the great advantage as a coolant of being immune to freezing, so no problem in cold temperatures, and of course oil has a very high boiling point, which allowed the engine to run at a much higher temperature, which is important when the tractor is operating on heavy fuel such as kerosene. The oil pull, 2-cylinder horizontal engine, very large engine, developed 40 horsepower at a very slow number of revs per minute, balanced by this huge heavy flywheel. This model, the 2040G, was what the upper middle range of sizes in which the oil pull was produced. There is a larger one, the 3060 Model E, which is a giant tractor. This one's big enough, believe me. Heavy tractor, the size of the front wheels, the size of the rear wheels, the cast iron cleats, the sheer torque and power of the engine, and the longevity which came from being over-engineered in almost every respect and having oil as a coolant, which in addition to all the advantages we mentioned earlier, also preserves the inner parts of the engine. No corrosion ever found in the cooling system of a Roomley tractor. The Roomley oil pull is now revered as one of America's most iconic machines. Roomley collectors are fanatical about them, and I agree with them. Roomley, one of the world's best ever tractors. After the era of the Mogul and the Titan tractor, that we talked about earlier, came the International 1020 gear drive tractor. Now, International Harvester traded as both IH and McCormick Deering. This came from Cyrus McCormick, who was the inventor of the original Reaper, and Deering Company, which was a competitor. These companies combined, amalgamated in the early part of the 20th century and traded as McCormick Deering. Later, an antitrust suit forced International to separate itself into the International Harvester Corporation and McCormick Deering. And so these tractors could be seen sold as International or McCormick Deering. This tractor is fitted with a 4-cylinder vertical kerosene engine with overhead valves and a very efficient vaporizer, 10 horsepower on the drawbar, 20 horsepower at the flywheel. A lot of these tractors were produced, and it was massively ahead of its day. Introduced in 1923 along with its larger brother, the 1530, this tractor features 3 forward speeds, 1 reverse, steel wheels, belt pulley, air cleaner, Pomona Vortox, oil washed air cleaner, and a lot of features which set it out ahead of tractors like the Fortson, which sold rather more cheaply. A man who had one of these had something rather better, something superior. This was the Rolls-Royce tractor of its era, and over 250,000 of these tractors were produced between 1923 and 1939. Before the International 1020 was introduced, International produced the 816 horsepower Junior. This tractor, 8 horsepower on the drawbar, 16 horsepower on the belt pulley. Rather unusual, and it featured a vertical 4-cylinder International truck engine with the radiator mounted behind it. See, the fan is encased in this shroud and draws air through this vertical radiator, which is situated just in front of the driver's platform. Junior tractors people have mixed feelings about them. They either love them or they hate them. They were reliable, they were capable, but they were already out of date when they were introduced. Featuring chain drive, when a lot of the competition was moving on to enclosed gear drive. When the people like Twin City were manufacturing gear drive tractors, when the Fortson Tractor was announced with enclosed gears, International were producing this tractor, the 816, with chains driving each rear wheel. So it was out of date when it was introduced, but it was a useful transitional tractor between the very antiquated Moguls and Titans and the very modern for its day International 1020, which we looked at previously. This one featured in green. The early tractors were green, later they were grey. This is a very early tractor and is fitted with the Madison Kip pressure oiler, which is separate from the engine and features pressure lubrication instead of having an integral oil pump mounted in the sump, as the later tractors did. Historic Ival Tractor, a British-built tractor from the turn of the century. One of the tiny number of these tractors still in existence today. This was really where it all started in England. The Ival Tractor, fitted with a horizontally opposed twin-cylinder petrol engine, tank cooling, open gearing, there for all to see, and this multiplex chain providing the primary transmission of power from the engine to the gearing. The final drive is provided by a heavy Reynolds type chain which provides the traction to the rear wheels. This tractor was part of the famous and sadly missed John Moffat Hyundai collection and is now in the care of David White. Another Wallis tractor now. This is a 1527 Wallis from the year 1921, and it's part of Malcolm Robinson's collection. Malcolm's a famous Massey Harris specialist. This tractor with the Wallis name cast very nicely into the side of the cylinder block. We can see it's a 4-cylinder vertical kerosene engine. The steel wheels again, the boilerplate chassis goes all the way through and provides an integral sump for the engine, so the lubricating oil for the engine is contained here. These two access plates are to go inside the engine to adjust the main bearings and big end bearings, which were white metal directly cast into the connecting rods and into the main bearing mounts. Shims could be removed as shims could be removed from the bearings to take up wear which occurred in normal use. This is a very nicely restored tractor. It's correct in every detail and is as good an example of a Wallis as is going to be seen anywhere in the world today. Now back to a product of the JI Case company. JI Case stands, of course, the JI stands for Jerome Increase Case. What a marvellous name to have, Increase. And he certainly did increase the magnitude of his business. We saw earlier the cross motor 1527 produced by the Case organisation. In 1929, the Model L and its smaller brother, the Model C, were introduced with a more conventional layout with the engine mounted longitudinally and the drive taken via a bevel gear to the transmission at the rear. The Case Model C was produced in very large numbers and very popular, and a lot of them came to the UK. It was a powerful little tractor for its size, and of course Case were very over-engineered, they were very long-lived and extremely reliable. Nice example from 1931. Now to a French tractor, the Simia, which was produced in France under license from the Saunderson company in the UK. It's basically a French copy of a Saunderson tractor, fitted again with the vertical 2-cylinder engine mounted transversely, driving the rear steel wheels via a multi-speed transmission. This particular tractor has been very nicely restored back to original condition. Note the skid rings on the front. This was to give the wheels a little purchase when the tractor was turning at the headland, allowed this particular skid ring to grip the land and avoid the tractor sliding forwards. Very few of these tractors now exist, and this is a very rare example in this sort of condition. Now, we talked earlier about the Minneapolis and the Twin City and how these famous makes came together to form Minneapolis Moline. Well, there was also the Moline Plough Company, which was another component of Minneapolis, and they produced Moline Universal Tractor. This one from about 1918. It's very nicely restored, and we can see on the front of the fuel tank the Moline Plough Company, Moline, Illinois. This was a smaller tractor, a lightweight cultivating tractor, designed really as a tool carrier. The driver sat here, steering wheels here, and it's all back to front. The driving wheels are in front of the driver, the steering wheels are here at the back. The actual tractor pivots in the middle, like this. It's articulated, which made it the forerunner of today's modern articulated tractors. As we said earlier, there's nothing new under the sun. The Moline Universal Tractor, limited degree of success because of its very specialised nature, but it again was a step forward from walking behind a horse. Nicely restored example from a local collection, and you don't see these every day. Another example of the Austin tractor here. Notice the blue livery, the same Austin 20 horsepower car engine adapted for agricultural work. And this one's fitted with traction blocks on the rear, and fairly heavy skid rings on the front. Starting handle here, no self-starters in those days. You came out on a cold morning, the oil was thick, and you really had to wind. But off she would go. Wood-rimmed steering wheel in the very best sports car tradition. And of course the Austin name, the famous Austin logo, emblazoned all the way down the side of the bonnet with the Austin badge, classic Austin badge in brass, beautifully fitted to the front of the cast radiator top tank. Another product now from the Roomley organisation, this time a smaller tractor, and from a slightly later era. The old Roomley oil pools were known as the heavyweights. The later Roomley oil pools known as the lightweights. In the case of Roomley, light is a relative term, as these were still a heavy tractor. But the framework was made of pressed steel. This tractor from 1929, one of the last oil pools produced. This is a Model W, 20-30 horsepower, 20 horsepower on the drawbar, 30 horsepower on the flywheel. The famous Roomley oil pool, two-cylinder, oil-cooled, kerosene-fueled engine. The famous Roomley cooling tower, where the coolant oil, hot oil from the engine, comes in at the top, passes down through a series of plates, and the exhaust, which passes through this exhaust pipe here into the top of the radiator cooling system, and is fired upwards through this venturi, causing a vacuum which sucks air, cooling air in at the bottom and through these vents. This cooling air causes the temperature of the coolant to fall, and it's returned to the engine and circulated continuously. And remember, oil doesn't freeze until a very low temperature when it turns into a kind of grease, and it doesn't boil till a much higher temperature than is likely to be reached in the engine of a tractor. So this tractor was massively reliable. It didn't freeze up, it didn't boil, it just kept working. And like all Roomley oil pools, it was very well engineered and lasts a lifetime. Now, another make, a very historic mate, the Hart Parr Model 30. This tractor, manufactured by Charles Hart and Charles Parr of Charles City, Iowa in the USA. Now, Hart Parr claim, with some justification, to be founders of the tractor industry. They invented the name tractor. Before that, tractors were called motorized traction engines, various other names for them, but Hart Parr called them a tractor. Hart Parr produced horizontal engine here. This is the crankcase with the cylinders facing backwards towards the driver. This one is a two-cylinder horizontal engine producing 30 horsepower at the flywheel, running on kerosene, impulse magneto, fuel tank here in the traditional Hart Parr green livery, fitted with steel wheels. Notice the air intake which is right up high, out of the area. The theory, anyway, is it's out of the area where the most dust was going to be drawn into the engine. Heart Par were eventually absorbed into the Oliver Corporation, and the first Oliver tractors were actually called Oliver Heart Pars. Gradually it was phased out, and another famous make vanished into the pages of the history books. This particular tractor, beautifully restored, very nice example of a quite unusual Heart Par tractor from the early days of mechanised farming. Now we come to something slightly later. This is the Fortson Tractor, manufactured in the UK and known as the Model N, or Standard Fortson Tractor. The tractor was an evolution of the earlier Model F, fitted with a development of the same engine, the side valve 4-cylinder, 4.3 litre engine. This is the air cleaner, which is filled with water. The engine basically draws clean air through this intake, down the steering column, into the air cleaner, where it's bubbled through the water, which the theory was that the water would wash out the particles of grit, which can be damaging to the engine, and then into the engine here. This tractor doesn't have a conventional carburettor. It has a float chamber here to maintain to restrict and maintain the supply of fuel at a constant level, and it has a mixing chamber here and a vaporizer to vaporize the kerosene fuel there. Like all kerosene and TVO engine tractors, it has a dual tank started on petrol, fitted into this tank, and run when the engine is hot on kerosene, which is in the main tank here. The rest of the tractor is a conventional layout, 3-speed gearbox as featured on the earlier Model F, conventional water cooling, conventional radiator, the steel wheels of the time. These are quite unusual row crop rear wheels. Notice the narrowness of the wheel and the almost skeletal construction of it. This could work between narrow rows of crops for inter-row cultivation. The Fortson tractors started grey for the Model F, then they were blue for the tractors fitted with a water-washed air cleaner. Then Ford decided to use Harvest Gold, which was an orange, yellowy, mustard-coloured tractor. And then during the war, they moved onto green as a camouflage against the attacks by German bombers flying over the Dagenham factory where these tractors were produced. The orange tractors were obviously a marvellous target for the bombers. The green ones blended into the countryside rather more. Significantly, after the war, Ford reverted to the blue and orange livery featured on this tractor, and that colour scheme was reintroduced when the Fortson Major E27N was introduced in 1945. Well, earlier on we looked at an example of the cross-motor tractor from Case. That was a 1527. This is a rather later tractor developing more power. This is an 1832, again featuring the transverse mounted engine which characterized all Case tractors of those days. The very heavy cast construction, heavy framework, like all Case tractors, very well engineered. This tractor is fitted with rim extensions to give extra traction. You can see here how this part of the wheel has been bolted on as a separate item. It's provided greater ground contact, better flotation, and these massive grousers provided the grip to deliver the power which this engine was capable of developing, deliver it to the ground and produce tractive effort. Notice the oil pressure gauge for the full pressurized lubrication system mounted on the side, so if the tractor driver wanted to check his oil pressure, he had to stop, get off and have a look. So it was a bit too late in case of any failure of the oil pressure system. But that was how things were. Here we have the petrol auxiliary tank, is used for starting only. This is the main tank filled with kerosene, and this is the changeover valve. One way provides petrol fuel for starting the engine, warming it up. The other way produces kerosene on which the tractor runs. Steel wheels at the front, heavy cast radiator. This is a nice feature that the blind of the tractor, the radiator blind, which was used to adjust the cooling, is actually featuring the case name and the model number 1832. Again, this means 18 horsepower on the drawbar, 32 horsepower at the flywheel. And this tractor, very conservatively rated, this engine actually produces rather more than 32 horsepower. But that was the policy of Case, always rate the tractor slightly less than it actually is capable of developing. That way people think, what a wonderful tractor, it's only 32 horsepower, look what it can do. Worked very well for Case, massively successful company, massively successful, very collectible tractor.